mic's working. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. If you haven't got your pie yet, there's plenty left. I'd like to start off with the Congregational Church. Wants to give her thanks for all they do here.
I need to grow. Thanks for coming. We really love having the legislative breakfast here every year. And if it's apple pie, it must be in Webridge. So thanks a bunch. Have a great meeting, and we'll also would be very welcoming to have you come on Sundays at 10 o'clock. We're open then too.
Thank you, Gail. This is the only way I can eat my oatmeal in the morning and not be unhappy about it, especially as it being a diabetic. I kind of wait for this. Just to remind you that next week we're going to be at the American Legion in Middlebury. Make sure you put that on your calendar. Most of you know what's happening with the schedule. Just to remind you this morning, the rule for new people in here, the way we run this is that we'll introduce the legislators and senators, have them introduce themselves, and then we'll start with questions. When you get to the mic, please get close enough to it so that you can be heard, because we are televising this. Are going to be able to put it on TV with Dick over here running the camera. So we need to have the voice to be able to make it work. Get up close to the mic, use it like a lollipop, because otherwise if you stand back here, you notice the difference. You can't be heard unless you really are loud. Maybe Fred would work out all right without the microphone. Excuse me, Fred. You've got a couple minutes for your question. You probably want to wait between another person coming up to ask another question, but you aren't limited at this point as to how many questions you can ask. Also, the respondents, 2 minutes also, and Jim's running the clock here. If you hear a little ding go off, you know it's time to wrap up what you're saying so we can get the most amount of information out. Hopefully, with a large crowd here we've got today, we're going to have a lot of conversation, a lot of questions, and a lot of answers to come. I thank the legislators and representatives for making this system that we've been using for a number of years work out, so you've got direct relations with your legislators. You know exactly what's going on up there, and you get to meet them because they're here, and they you know who they are by facial, and also most of you are have the chutzpah to get up and say who you are and introduce yourself to them. So let's go this morning with this handsome young man you brought with you, Claire.
Good morning. My name is Claire Eyre. I serve all the towns of Addison County as well as Huntington and Buells Gort in the Senate. This is my 14th year. I chair Senate Health and Welfare, and in the afternoon I'm on Finance. And this is my executive assistant, Max. He's kind of quiet, but he's very good.
I notice especially when you try to pull him away from his apple pie. Makes it a little tough. The mics, one up here, there's two in the back, so kind of position yourselves. Like an airport, we want to run the next person right behind the last one, so we don't waste time in between for people to run into the mic. So don't be afraid to come up and use this one if you're closer, or that one back where Chris is, and there's one back there near Harvey. Go ahead, Chris.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven, and I serve along with Senator Eyre in the Senate. My morning committee is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, which I chair, and in the afternoons I serve on government operations.
Good morning. I'm Representative Harvey Smith. I represent the towns of Webridge, Bridport, and New Haven, and I sit on the House Agriculture Committee.
Good morning. I'm Representative Dave Sharp. I serve Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton in the House, and I'm the chair of the Education Committee.
Hello, everyone. My name's Fred Baser. I serve along with Dave up in the northeast corner of the county, Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton, and I'm on House Commerce and economic development.
Did we miss anyone? I guess not. Okay, it's time for you to perform out there. Who has the first question? Tim Buskey is running to the mic. Next person up to the next mic, please.
I'm actually not running to the mic, Bill, but
Well, look like
we saw a report this morning in the Free Press on Senator Bray's S-230 and wondered what the amendments, since it's been taken over to the House, what the amendments were that are upsetting us all. The S-230 is the energy siting bill, talking about the solar panels all across Vermont and where they're going. And Chris, you introduced a bill that addressed that, and now it's over in the House and they're doing something to it. What are they doing?
Well, I would never presume to know what the House will be doing to it. I'm really, so last Thursday the Senate passed with a great strong vote, 22-3, the energy bill for this session, and I'm really very happy with the results. The nub of the problem was that we are moving over a period of 40, 50 years away from relying on large generating stations that send all the power over transmission lines to us, to moving to generating more of our power locally and generating it renewably. So that means things like the cow power farm right down the street, geothermal, solar, and the crucial transition is to cleaner energy from fossil fuel-based energy. The big challenge is that when you move to distributed generation, now you start having all these facilities built out on the landscape. There are land use impacts, and the state's energy planning program has historically not looked at land use impacts. And that has set up an unfortunate conflict between towns that are, for decades, have had the authority and the obligation to do land use planning for themselves. When these projects, perhaps the thing you most hear about lately is solar arrays, are being built, the towns are feeling like they had too little influence over how they were being built. And at the Public Service Board, when a town came and participated, their town plan was given due consideration. But many towns felt as though due consideration was too little influence, too little consideration. So we needed to knit together energy planning with land use planning, and that's the heart of what S-230 does. And the way it does it is that the state, which has always had this large-scale energy planning obligation, is now working, will be working with regional planning commissions and municipal planning commissions to say, how might your region, how might your town make its own choices to participate in renewable energy development, but do it in a way that feels good to you, that's cited well for your town, for the way you'd like to see things roll out. And I think that is going to get us out of what could have been decades of conflict and get us into a pattern of decades of planning together. Because underneath it all, Vermonters overwhelmingly have said in poll after poll that they wanted to make this move to renewables, but how to do it has been the challenge. And S-230 really takes that on, and I'm delighted with what's happened. Tim alluded to some controversy. I think, depending on how you do your counting, over 40 amendments were offered in the 2 days that we were on the floor, and some of those came from my own committee, some came from finance, some came from appropriations, and another handful were all served up on the floor. So it was an interesting and challenging piece of floor work to move through all that discussion. But the essence of the bill has stayed the same, and some of the more controversial amendments related to things like, actually, all but one passed. So sometimes I think it's just the odd man out that was actually defeated on the floor, and that was a provision that said that on wind projects, which this bill has never been about, someone wanted to add a provision that said For every wind project in the state of Vermont, regardless of its size or when it was built, there should be 24/7, 365 continuous sound monitoring. And it had two problems. One, that it was, I thought, could be very costly to anyone running any kind of wind facility. And secondly, it was going to be applying after the fact an obligation on people who had come before the state in good faith and received a permit through the state. So on two counts, it seemed like a serious problem. Plus, again, the bill was all about citing solar, and this was, I'd say, a very active but small group that wanted to also put this wind provision in. And that amendment was defeated 18-8 on the Senate floor, so I think there was broad support not to throw something like that in at the last minute. So I don't know that there'll be, who knows what will happen on the House side. There may be some change. I'm sure there will be some change. But I think the bill is solid, and I hope we pass it. And I'm delighted to see that we may have gotten ourselves to a situation where we can plan together and get out of ongoing conflict over the move to renewables.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a follow-up to Chris's comments, and I've been concerned about the using of agricultural land, primary ag soils for solar, and it seems to me a great waste of new resources to just build huge solar projects on agricultural land, and I'd just like to know how the bill addresses that issue.
I want to give credit where credit is due. Senator Starr and the Senate Ag Committee worked with Finance and added in provisions designed to protect primary agricultural soils in the state. There is a bit of a balancing act. There are, ever since this is my 8th year in the legislature, but I arrived there 10 years ago. I was out for 2, and ever since I've been there, we've been talking about trying to find ways to help farms become more financially stable and viable for the long term by diversifying their income. One of those streams of income can be by generating clean energy. So I think the balance is trying to make sure that farms that want to generate renewable energy as part of their overall program can continue to do so, but we also want to minimize impacts on prime ag soils. As Senator Starr says, we're not creating any more prime ag soils.
Senator Starr is absolutely correct. We're not. And if we use them up with solar projects, which are, in my mind, permanent installations, the same as any other development, then I'm really concerned that we will be using a natural resource that is not replaceable.
Well, so the interesting thing, I mean, we haven't lived with solar long enough to know how this will really unfold and what kind of new technologies will come along. But solar, as currently designed and discussed, is generally, they look at it as roughly a 25-year working lifespan. And it can be added to a field. They just drive posts and set the arrays out. We will have to all see how this plays out. There is, some of the thinking is after 25 years, these things may be relatively low function and there'll be better technologies and they'll simply be plucked out. But of course, the alternative is that 25 years from now, there'll just be more efficient solar panels, and someone will put in the next generation of panel, and they'll keep on going. So we'll have to stay healthy, and we'll both see how this works out.
John Ball from Addison. I'm wondering, with these solar arrays, if that agricultural land couldn't be kept being used as agricultural land by grazing something under them, planting cover crops that will sequester carbon into the soil, and I'm going to get up a little later and talk about that as well. But I can see that there are possibilities with these solar arrays to keep them agriculture and maybe have a win-win situation by grazing and sequestering.
So thank you, John. I'm sure that people have probably noticed there is a a large array, about 2 megawatts, on the flats on the road between New Haven and Virgins, the one that's set well back and has 2 little things that look kind of like sugar shacks there. There are sheep grazed underneath those panels for a good portion of the summer and fall, so you can blend the two. Mike Kiernan from I don't know if he lives in Webridge or Middlebury, but at any rate, he started a whole business on bringing beehives to solar arrays. I think they're down on the south side of Middlebury. There's now 50,000 bees living alongside those arrays, and his concept is to work with every developer of arrays to place hives out with them, because we have a challenge in the state in getting enough pollinators, bees out there buzzing around, since they have an important job to do to pollinate crops.
I wonder if the bobolinks will nest under them. They won't? Or has anybody researched that?
Peter Briggs, Town of Addison. S230, well, you say it takes power away from the Public Service Board. It requires the Public Service Board's signature on a regional plan, which then the local plans are based off of. How is that taking power away from the Public Service Board?
Well, so the goal is not to take power away from the Public Service Board. The goal is to empower towns and regions to do planning that was in their own best interest, but in such a way that it is in concert with the state's plans. So the Department of Public Service, we have a variety of programs, statutes we pass over the years setting environmental goals for reducing greenhouse gases, for instance, moving to, or the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which a lot of people may know as 90% renewable energy by 2050. And so we take the state's Department of Public Service has worked on developing plans that, and they will work with regions to say, how would your region want to figure out what kind of energy projects you would do in your region that are supportive of those overall statewide goals that are in statute. And then a region's plan gets certified by the state. Then already towns bring town plans to regional planning commissions for certification. But now one of the things when they come up to their RPC, they'll be getting certified on energy as well, and it will be with an eye towards renewable generation. Towns that have and regions that have been certified as being supportive of the state's overall energy goals, when they go before the Public Service Board, will be given a special level of influence. So as I mentioned before, when you come before the Public Service Board in a proceeding, a town plan is given due consideration. But if you have a certified regional plan or town plan in terms of its energy component, you will be given substantial deference. So the teeter-totter flips over. The town plan will prevail unless there is clear and convincing evidence that there is a public good that surpasses the town plan. And the lawyers tell me that that is a very high threshold for the Public Service Board or an applicant to ever cross. So we take towns at their word that they want to be part of planning. Those that do, when they get to the board, will be far more influential. And that is the new balance that we're looking for.
But these will be town plans that will be under the jurisdiction of the state, or at least the Public Service Board, or at least the state. So ultimately, if they don't like a plan because it's going to hamper what they've been doing too much, they can just say, you got to change it.
Well, so it gets confused. So it is the Department of Public Service, not the Public Service Board, that reviews the plans. And if a town, one of the things that came up on the floor was an appeal process. People wanted to make sure they raised the concern that you brought up here, which is, what if there were an administration that had a very particular point of view and they were not certifying plans? What recourse would a town or regional planning commission have? So we created an appeal process that uses neutral lawyers from outside the department, and then if an appellant didn't like that decision, they have recourse to the Vermont Supreme Court of the State of Vermont.
And your fellow colleague, Senator Bobby Starr, says that this is a do-nothing bill, he believes. Would you care to explain that?
I'm unaware of that quote, so I'll have to, a lot of things changed day by day. I'm not sure when he made it. That would be an astounding assessment to me if that was based on what we passed.
So to step into this from the House perspective a little bit, it's clear to me, and I think to us in the House, that while there is widespread support for renewable energy, and there is a belief that we need renewable instead of coal-fired power plants in our energy future, it's in your town, not mine. So it's a conflict that is difficult to resolve because the goal is similar. We want renewable energy, but we want someone else to suffer the consequences. The problem is, there isn't any easy way to keep the lights on in this building or in your home. And there are trade-offs and there are problems with every form of generating energy. And so we need to look carefully at how we move forward as a state. So we'll be taking a look at the Senate's bill and doing our best to do the best for Vermonters.
John Cristiano, New Haven. I'm going to go back to where I started out when I got involved in the political process a little over a year ago. In the town of New Haven, the voters, that's people like you and me, voted on a town plan that restricted the size of solar arrays. Almost immediately, we started being inundated by people from all over the U.S. looking for copies of the grand list so that they could find a bare piece of ground that they could stick one of these things on. And the town plan maxed out at like 150 kilowatts. And we're faced with solar arrays that are in the megawatts. 2.2 is one in particular. And the Public Service Board basically ran over us like a steamroller. And I was really offended by that because I felt then and I feel now that there's a steady erosion of the rights of the people. Again, that's you and I, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I would like to think that you'd be aware of where this is going, not just this particular aspect. This is just one of them, one of many. But there has to be a stop to it, in my opinion. And I disagree vehemently with the right of the Public Service Board, a body of unelected officials that can come into the town and tell several hundred people that our rights don't mean anything. And I think you all ought to think about that.
So I'll just make one more statement on 230. Well, who knows? Maybe this is not the last one. But the S230 gives Vermonters a broader, deeper, far more influential voice in how we plan our energy future together.
John, your comments were well said, and I've been serving on the Regional Planning Commission for quite a number of years now, probably 20, 25 years. And over that period of time, we've seen a lot of changes. And one of the things that we're cognizant of is the fact that the state wants to have more and more say in our local land use planning. And I know that our plan is reviewed by the state. The state comes back with recommendations to make it a better plan, make it a stronger plan, make it more conforming with what's happening around the state. And the needs of Chittenden County are substantially different than the needs of Addison County. And so I think that we want to have, a strong planning process. And I know when we had some directives a few years ago to come up with a plan to support energy siting of solar and wind and hydro in all of those. And hydro is a lot easier because there's only a few sites in our community that would really operate those. But when we first had the directive from the state, we were thinking, wow, we need to select a location for these facilities to go in, wind and solar. And so we hesitated to do that. And so as time evolved, it got to the point where, what is the process for siting solar and wind? And that's kind of where we're focused now. And I am concerned also about the towns. We do approve the town plans, but we don't tell the towns what needs to be in their plan. We know that we have certain components that are required to be in the plan, but we don't direct the town to do that. We just say, and I don't think we've ever denied the approval of a town plan when they come to us, and we have to approve, or all the town plans and the regional plan has to be approved on a 5-year basis. So if a town came in and had a spot that was weak, had a spot that was missing, we would encourage them to look at that, you know, and the next time they go through the planning process to either strengthen or put something in that area. And now I'm hearing that we're going to be, at least I thought I heard, that we could be under the same supervision from the state looking at the regional plan. So we're going to have to think about this as we go through, and I'm glad we had this discussion. It was probably one of the most thorough discussions we've had on energy siting, and I've got to give Chris credit for coming up and dealing with a very, very tough issue, but I'm hearing there's maybe some other consequences associated with this that we need to understand as we go through the process.
Thank you, Harvey. I mean, planning is a complex activity, as Harvey knows better than I, because he's participated in so much of it for so long through the Addison County Regional Planning Commission. And this program builds on a pilot program that's been run for the last year between the state and 3 regional planning commissions. So the Bennington County RPC, Ottaquechee Two Rivers over towards Hartford, and Northwestern, so up Franklin County way. And this was to basically test the concept that regional planning commissions could work with the state on energy planning. Most of the energy planning historically has been, how might your town think about saving energy? So energy conservation in terms of transportation or construction, things like that. But it was never how you would generate renewable energy. And oil, I shouldn't say never. Rarely has that been the focus of the planning. So there's a lot of expertise required in terms of being able to assess what kind of energy needs your region has, what kind of loads there are on the grid, what kind of grid infrastructure you have that could support developing renewables. And that kind of technical expertise is what the state has offered to regional planners, and they've helped them with mapping and a whole variety of educational and technical services. And these 3 planning commissions that came before our committee repeatedly were very enthusiastic, and I would say they switched over time from being interested but maybe a little concerned or skeptical to being great supporters of the they thought, healthy, productive, and respectful partnership that they have with the Department of Public Service. So that's just 3 RPCs out of the state's 11. Another group of 4 are just about to start, and then there'll be a 3rd group with the final 4 following on right behind them.
Okay, my name is Lynn Dyke from Bristol. Chris, you said something that really got to me. And that is, we're giving Vermonters this. You're giving us something that we've already have. I feel like somebody is taking away things and then parceling it back to us. We're getting pinched in all directions. There's new taxes I see now, new fees that are really pinching. And I don't know who they are, the experts or whatever, but maybe I should be grateful that I'm being given something back, but I really wish that somebody would stop taking everything. Now, there is a saying, measure once, cut twice. And I think people, they just say, this is a great idea, let's do it, and they start cutting the boards and whatever, and then we end up with a mess, and we've got patches all over the place. You know, maybe it would be nice to just stop and think and not try to rush all these things through. And we do have a higher power, which is God, that He makes the standard of right and wrong. It's not the lobbyist or the union people or anything, and we better start fearing Him and not the people that are going to take away our money.
Thank you for that. You know, I appreciate the sensitivity of talking about giving Vermonters a greater voice when ultimately it is we, the people, that always have that voice. So let me explain. What we're now delegating back to towns is most of us have never had to give a moment's thought to where our energy came from. You turn on the switch, there's electricity. You don't have to wonder who's generating, where it's generating. The classic paradigm is that we have safe, affordable, reliable power at the lowest cost to Vermonters, and it's generated somewhere, and we never had to think about it. The state was the one that took care of that responsibility. Now, so the giving is actually saying that if towns want to influence how we build out renewables, the towns take on some of the responsibility for learning about how all that works and doing the planning. So it's the state had accepted a task. Now towns will take on some of that work themselves. But the only way to make something reflect your own local priorities is to participate in the planning of it. And so we're really shifting who needs to think about these things from the state takes care of it for us to now we'll all think about it. And so it's with complete respect that I talk about that shift.
Craig Zondag, New Haven. Just a comment and observation of solar application and something I'd like to see the state to address, as well as communities in Vermont, is that there's an awful lot of flat rooftops and angled rooftops in the state of Vermont that could be utilized for solar application, where we wouldn't have to be using ag land. And I think because of all the different angles of rooftops, there would probably be a more efficient means of collecting solar energy as opposed to the fixed array panels that are out in fields. And so I just would really like to see the state to help see that through.
Fred Baser. One of the things that I'm hoping the state will explore is the purchase of the hydro plants on the Connecticut River, which I understand have recently gone up for sale. I know we had an opportunity some years ago and we didn't quite get it. But hydro is renewable. These dams already exist, and I don't know the amount of electricity that they generate, but they're fairly considerable. And I hope the state makes a good effort to pursue purchasing those hydro projects, as it might make a nice contribution towards the goal that the state has set for itself. I also know that our friendly neighbors to the north in Quebec have a significant amount of hydropower that's available. We have all kinds of folks that want to run lines through portions of our state in order to deliver that power, clean power, to southern New England. And I would also, I guess, encourage the state very much to capitalize and purchase as much of that clean hydro that is available to us from our friends in Quebec. Those types of things might reduce the pressure that we have concerning renewable generation here. Use a partnership of the two, but maybe not depend entirely on one or the other. And as I said, I think that hydropower will last almost indefinitely, and it is also very inexpensive relative to the renewable resources that we're currently building.
So to catch up here, thank you for the comment about rooftops. Over the last couple of years, we've heard people talking about let's build more on rooftops, or let's build more on parking lots. Let's use brownfields, landfills, unused portions of quarries. And in S230, we create the category of preferred locations. So it's exactly all those sorts of spots, as opposed to pristine green fields being used first, that we would encourage the development of those other preferred locations that I just listed. As for the Connecticut River Hydro, both the Senate and the House already has setting up working committees to begin a formal investigation into the possibility of purchasing those hydro dams. They are 500 megawatts in total, so that's compared to the daily normal load in the state of Vermont, which is about 800. That would be a very significant portion of the state's energy capacity. The nub of all this is to figure out to what degree is the state interested and capable of cost-effectively taking ownership of a large series of dams and running them. It may be that we are better off letting the private sector manage those, and we're their customer. But anyway, that's the open question that will get looked into. The other thing with the power that's coming down from Hydro-Quebec, right now about 25% of Vermont's power comes from Hydro-Quebec. It's been as high as something like 32%. But these are decisions that individual utilities make. They go out to the marketplace, they go shopping for electricity, again with the goal of keeping prices low and maintaining reliability. And so when we talk about the Amberic line to New Haven, or TDI down to Coolidge and Cavendish, or the hydro dams in the Connecticut River, we're always looking at protecting ratepayers and making sure that we don't. We want to make sure that we allow people to basically bargain for the best energy at the best price on behalf of Vermonters.
I'm Bobby Carnwath. I'm on the Cornwall Planning Commission, and I would like to thank Senator Bray and others for the work they've done on 230. I think 230 looks like something that we can work with as town planners. And we talk about the government comes and takes our rights away, and how can they do that? But I think I'm going to guess a lot of us in this room know that we do want to see moving toward renewable energy, and we say that, and yet we haven't done anything proactive. How would we like to see that happen? So I think that this does put it back in the hands of the towns, and I'm looking forward to working and getting a plan that's going to have some teeth. Speaking of which, I think a lot of the dis-ease about what's going on in energy has to do with the way the Department of Public Service has been handling energy in general, which is going right over the top of what the people have been wanting to have in their backyards and in their state as a whole. And I know that the legislature is looking into the Public Service Department, and I saw part of that playing out, which did not seem to be very effective. So I wanted to ask what the next steps in that are going to be to evaluate the accountability of the Public Service Department and maybe make it a little bit more in touch with the people.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up with the placement of solar. And when we first started talking about solar, I was really thinking of rooftops and underutilized ground, so I'm glad that you brought it up. But on the other hand, I've worked with several of the businesses, farmers that own large barns that have the south-facing roofs, with the idea that maybe they could install some solar on those. And what we discovered was that the design of the building wasn't meant to carry that additional load, and so there was some huge capital investments that would need to be made in order to make that happen. But I will say, in New Haven, with our town hall that we have there, a few years ago, we did renovate that building, and when we renovated that building, I think that we restructured the roof large enough or strong enough to carry some solar panels there. Just so we were thinking ahead that way, whether the numbers that we had and the advice that we had at the time would actually accomplish that. I have great confidence that it has, but as time goes on, things change. So.
Bobby Carnaz asked a question about what's next in terms of the Public Service Department and how we look at how they serve us. In Senate Health and Welfare, from a public health point of view, we're going to take testimony next week. We just have been organizing it over the weekend to look at the Public Service Department, the Public Service Board, and the Department of Health to see how a citizen or anyone who lives around here who they call if there's an issue with other, power issues. I'm speaking specifically now, or it was caused by the issue of wind power. But what happens if you have a question about a solar array or something in your own backyard? Who do you call? Who answers the phone? What do they do? All that sort of stuff, to look at what's supposed to be the procedure and what's actually being done, and to make recommendations to strengthen that so people at least have someone to call if there's an issue, and some sort of assurance that they're going to get a call back from somebody. And on the subject of rooftop solar, I did have a bill, and it may not be the end of it. I've had it a couple of times, to require big box stores and other large buildings that are heated or cooled to install solar arrays. And what I asked for was a committee of people who know about this stuff, who run big businesses, who install solar arrays, to look at the issues around that. We don't want to discourage a lot of businesses, but at the same time, if they're going to leave the doors open and the air conditioning on all summer, maybe they could generate a little of their own electricity.
So I'll just quickly, I'm Heidi Willis from Salisbury, and I'll just quickly follow up on that, Claire. I've thought for a number of years that, well, maybe for the last 5 or 6, but that we might want to get to the point of requiring any new construction, that would be residential and or building, to provide, say, a certain percentage of their own energy. So, and the builder would decide, is it going to be passive that they use? Are they going to use solar? Are they going to use a windmill in the backyard? But say it would keep us aware of the fact that energy just doesn't magically appear, that it has to be produced somewhere. It would affect the construction of the building, the siting of it perhaps. We think about that in terms of waste. We think of it in terms of electric. There are requirements for that. So I would suggest at some point in time that I just pick a percentage of 30%, so that if you build a house, somehow your construction, or you need to plan to provide 30% of your own energy. So again, just to keep in mind that energy doesn't magically appear.
So I'd like to turn back to the comments about taxes. We passed the education tax bill out last week, and thanks to the work in the legislature and the work of school boards across the state, the average homestead taxes will be up 0.4 of a penny, a very, very tiny increase, and the non-residential property taxes for education are actually going to decrease. And that's a fixed amount that's determined at the legislature. So we have worked very hard to keep education costs down this year. I'm hopeful that as we move forward with larger, more efficient school districts, that we'll be able to moderate the cost of education going forward. And then with regard to the taxes that were passed in the legislature to support state government, the majority of that increases go to Medicaid. And health care costs, whether we're talking about school systems or Medicaid or Medicare, are just an incredible burden for our taxpayers and for our society at this point. I would point out, there are a number of people that say, well, you should cut here or cut there. One of the increases in Medicaid costs this past year has been a new drug that was developed for cystic fibrosis. Now, that happens to be a really big deal in my community. So am I going to vote to deny Medicaid recipients in my community access to cystic fibrosis drugs? I'm not going to do that. And so then we have to raise the money to pay for that. And those are difficult decisions. But I believe in taking care of our neighbors and our fellow Vermonters, so I support that kind of action. Also, home health and hospice. We made sure we got some additional increase in Medicaid reimbursement for those facilities. They provide a fantastic service to elders in our community, and they haven't seen an increase in how many years, Tim? 7 years? And, so those are difficult decisions that we have to make. And when we make these decisions to fund these medical facilities, medical costs, it costs money and taxes are involved. So it's not easy sitting in the legislature and looking at these issues. We think that we've made the best decisions going forward.
George Belrose, Weybridge, and I'll try and be brief because Claire has to get her assistant to school. This is a healthcare question. It seems like single payer is off the table now. I'd be interested in what is happening now as far as cost containment and improved access, and perhaps an update on what the Green Mountain Healthcare Board is doing in regard to those areas.
Thank you. We're doing a lot, mostly on cost containment is where we're working, and somewhat on increased access. In the area of cost containment, the Obamacare, approved a concept called Accountable Care Organizations, ACOs. And what that means is hospitals and doctors and so on get together in teams. We may end up with one statewide team, which gives some people the creeps and other people think it's probably could be a good thing. But so that when they bill for somebody's care, it's the total care that happens. If there's a nutritionist in your group, or a physical therapist, or a brain surgeon, whatever it is you need, it's in this group, and they would be paid by the head, basically. There's a big formula to figure out how much it would cost to take care of a 67-year-old or a 6-year-old, and they'll use that to figure out what that's worth. So that's one thing that's happening. The other thing that's happening, and we are going forward with it, is called an all-payer. It's a series of waivers from the federal government. And in that, we'll put together Medicaid money, private pay money, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Medicare money will all go in the same pot, and we'll be able to even out. The idea is we're hoping to raise money for primary care. They're underpaid, terribly underpaid. And to go, excuse me, get to stop there for a minute, okay. But the idea is to even out the payments and make it more predictable for providers, make it a better way for consumers to get the care, because the providers know that they're going to be paid. One thing everybody asks and everybody needs to know is the rights of people who have Medicare will not be abridged in any way. In fact, the proposal we have actually gives you 2 or 3 more rights in the system. It's not a done deal yet, but that's how it's going to happen. We're working on a set of principles that have come from the House about how this organization, both of these concepts would work. And a big part of that is we don't touch Medicare. We make sure we keep the funds as they go in, separate and accountable. A lot of things like that. People maintain the same standards of care or improve, maintain the same access or improve. And then we're working with drugs, trying to figure out a different way to work in the system. We're very small. We're not even as big as a large city, our whole state, so our negotiating power is pretty minimal, but we're looking at different ways we might be able to get together and do more negotiating. So far we haven't gotten anywhere, but we're working hard on it. Okay, we're done. Did that help? Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Claire. Have a good day at school today, Max.
Mark Bobin in Addison. I don't know if it's been addressed, but the required agricultural practices the way they're being adopted has me concerned, because I go to these meetings and they take their 2-hour meetings. The state employees take an hour and a half of it, and then they ask for comments, and everybody's limited to 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 2 minutes, depending on how many people want to comment. I went to 4 of them last fall because I couldn't say what I wanted to say because I was time limited. And when I got this document that they put out it's a summary of the comments, it says that the comments were for the buffers on agricultural field ditches be increased to 25 feet or more. All the meetings that I went to, nobody made that comment that they should be expanded. I provided comment at each of those that was going to be detrimental to the water quality. I presented written testimony to that effect, and no reference to my testimony being in there. But it makes me wonder, is there a back door where other people go in and can say everything that they want to say and present all the evidence, while the public is cut out by being time limited? By being time limited, then people say, oh, there was only a comment, but there was no evidence presented. When will there be an open hearing where people can truly speak their mind and give all the evidence they want without being time limited on this issue? Thank you.
I'm not going to defend the Agency of Agriculture and how they follow the process, but I know it is a fairly open process, and they have asked for an extension in the rulemaking process. They were supposed to have it done by 1st of July, and it looks like it's going to be sometime in the fall that they're looking for. But I know they take written comments because I've reviewed some of the written comments. Some of the groups share their comments, so I know they're coming in. So I don't know, have you sent in written comments?
I presented them by hand when I was at those meetings.
Okay. So anyways, I just I want to say that they've had a lot of public meetings, and I know I've heard comments on both sides. It's not regulated enough. It's regulated too much. They've got this wrong, they've got this right. So it's a process they go through, and I wouldn't give up. I would draft those comments and send them in again. You have another opportunity.
Well, part of my problem is that they want written testimony. Part of my problem is the preference for written comments rather than oral comments. Now, the evidence has to be presented, and there's certain rules of evidence. And when you start limiting people and they're not allowed to present the factual evidence to support their premise, and part of the reason for doing it orally is so that you can convince other people of the value of your argument. If it's only presented by evidence, somebody can look at it that's a bureaucrat and say, oh, it doesn't meet my preconceived idea of what we want, so therefore it goes in the trash can. Whereas if it's presented orally and publicly, everybody can hear and determine the value of the argument.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a fair statement, but I also know that they have a huge volume of written comment that they're supposed to take into account. I understand your desire to have other people hear what your comments is, and maybe that would drive some further discussion along that line, but I don't know. I'm just going to say that I think it's a fairly open process, whether the result is what any individual is looking for. I know from the farm community there's a lot of farmers that are really concerned about their future with increased costs and increased regulation, and sometimes it's science-based and sometimes it's not science-based. It's just you know, kind of a feel-good thing. So I don't know what the answer is, other than it is a relatively open process, and I would encourage you to continue to be involved in it.
So with regard to how open the process is in the legislature, I've found it very interesting and challenging as a chair of a committee. On the one hand, when we're considering a bill, I make every effort to get all points of view to testify in the committee, giving them the opportunity that you speak of to take 15 minutes or half an hour to present their case and convince the committee that they've got the right idea or the wrong idea, and that process works pretty well. However, when you have 200 people that want to testify on something, like we had on the marijuana issue, which fortunately is not in my committee, but you can't give everybody 15 minutes or a half an hour. It's just physically impossible. So you have to have a hearing situation where everybody is time limited. And I find it, as a chair of a committee, incredibly challenging to get all points of view, to inform the committee fully, both from the lobbyist perspective and citizens perspective and various groups in the community, to have their input into the work we're doing around education, and then at the same time having a reasonable schedule for getting the job done. One thing I want to say about the rules process is that it's much more difficult, opaque and difficult for citizens to be involved in the rulemaking process, and I have been on a mission the last couple of years to try to pry that process open so that there is better knowledge of when rules are being developed, more within the administrative branch, because by the time they get to the legislative oversight of the rules, it's pretty much cooked. So real input needs to take place while the administration is developing these rules, and so finding ways that the public is notified so that they know when and where rules are being discussed and where they might have input is really important. And right now it's not as clear as it ought to be, and I'm going to continue working in that regard, so that because a lot of what we live with is the rules following the legislation. So it's important that the public is knowledgeable about and involved in the rulemaking process, and I'm going to continue to work to make that a more public process.
Hi, my name is Dave Solderman. I'm an attorney in Middlebury, and some of you have seen me at these before. I'm an advocate for marijuana legalization, and specifically for doing it in a way that is socially, politically, economically sustainable, ecologically sustainable. Last week at the lunch, which unfortunately I wasn't able to go to, there was quite a lot of discussion. I read Mr. Flowers' fine article on it. I wanted to first clear up something that was misstated there. There was a lot of concern, Harvey, you raised the concern, Dan, who's not here, about the ability of small farmers in particular to access this new marijuana market if the bill were to pass. And there was a statement that a cultivation license will cost $25,000. The bill, which I have a copy here, if anyone wants to see it, creates several classes of cultivation licenses depending on size of your cultivation canopy. The opening price in the current draft is $3,000. The maximum price is $15,000. It's basically $3 per square foot of canopy. I've called on the House to reduce those prices further, create another class of what I call craft cultivation licenses of up to 500 square feet grown outdoors, because outdoors requires less electricity, less water waste. Willem's not here to say whether I've been getting any traction in the Judiciary Committee with that idea, but I hope I have. I think that with some changes to the bill, we can bring more small farmers into this industry, allow them to diversify their crops further. It may not be traditional, but it is certainly lucrative. The wholesale price for marijuana is approximately $2,000 a pound. And with a 500 square foot canopy, a farmer can supplement his income growing outdoors with $75,000, $80,000 a year very easily.
Yeah, just a little clarification. This is not just a state issue, it's a federal issue. And all the farmers that use any of the farm programs or use a lending agency, and especially if that lending agency is specifically associated with the USDA program, all the USDA programs, you have to sign an affidavit that you're not doing anything illegal like marijuana or any of the other kind of drugs. And in order to be included in any of the federal programs, and so that would mean the banking institution as well. So even though the state might have a desire to move forward with it, it's still regulated as an illegal substance on the federal level, and it puts every farmer who has taken out any kind of financing in jeopardy.
Sure.
Harvey, you're absolutely right that this is still illegal in the federal level in the Controlled Substances Act, Schedule 1 drug. Hopefully that might change in the future. I would say that with respect to banking, there has been a slight opening of the door in financial services. In this state, Commissioner Donegan testified that VSECU is willing to open up accounts, and so we are seeing that door open up slightly. I definitely hear you about the struggle of, how do you certify your compliance with law? And those are issues that are difficult, and you're absolutely right. They are difficult issues to deal with, and something that we need to deal with.
Last year we passed a Clean Water Act, and that Clean Water Act comes with a lot of financing from the federal level. If we're really serious about cleaning up the waters of the state, we're going to have to access some of those dollars. And by having this affidavit that you have to sign to have access to any of those funds or technical assistance or anything else associated with it, this would be off limits.
Hi, I'm Jan Louise Ball. I live in Addison. I'm a gardener, farmer, chicken husbandry woman, and beekeeper, and environmentalist deep down in my heart. And it's time to take this plant, and I think Vermont should be first. We call it marijuana, we call it hemp. It's time to take it off the chopping block. It is not something that needs to be a criminal. It's a beautiful plant. I don't grow it. I wish I could. I wish I could grow 1, 2, 3 maybe. Grow it for myself and my friends. If you grow it in huge numbers, it's going to become something that is a monster, that everybody wants to grow so they can make a lot of money off of it. You don't need to make money off of it, you just need to have it as a companion plant with your tomato so that they both grow well and you have a beautiful plant. Why are we making this law so impossible? It's not hard to do, folks. We just bring it down to the level of a plant and a seed, which is what it is. It was given by the Creator. It was, this woman that spoke of God, that was very brave of you. I call it Great Spirit. Great Spirit gave us everything on this planet. Everything. And until we start respecting the plants as a plant and stop treating it as a criminal, marijuana, hemp, is not a criminal. I worked for someone who lived next to a wetland, and the farmer planted corn there. And it's GMO chemical corn at this point. And all the geese and all the birds were coming there. I worked for her for 5 years, and within those 5 years, they ate that corn. They went into the farmer's field, ate the corn. The wetland was where they lived when they went through, all the geese and everything. Over those years, they've all disappeared. I know they're in other places. But the ones that are eating this corn that's coated with chemicals, why aren't we working on getting rid of the chemicals and let the plants grow? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dinah Bain from Bridport, and I have a taxes question. I do taxes for AARP Tax Aid, and I've noticed that this year the property tax income level has gone from 107.5, I think, to 137.5. With the state having such a large deficit, why did you increase it by that much in 1 year?
So the cutoff is still $90,000. What we changed was the house site value that is eligible. So there is we used to call it a clope, because from 90,000 to 105 was a pretty steep, not a cliff, where $1 over 90,000 cut you out completely, but it was pretty steep. By increasing the house site value to $250,000, it does allow a slope. So it's supposedly out to about $135,000. So at $134,000 and a home site value of $250, your credit is, $5 or $10. And so it's not like moving the 90,000 out to 137. It's making more of a slope. And I am a big believer in slopes in government policy. We hear all the time where Reach Up and food stamps and other of our welfare programs, if you make $1 over the limit, you lose your benefit and you lose your incentive to get a job. That's what we hear. And so it's important that we put slopes in place so that we encourage people to grow the economy, get jobs, and be greater participants in our society. So that's what we did, was we increased the slope in income sensitivity. There is a bill in our committee to move completely to income. And there's also another bill to overhaul the funding system. It's been over 15 years that we've had this funding system in place for education, which in my recollection is the longest time that we've had a single education funding plan in the state. It's worked rather well, but it has had a lot of bells and whistles attached to it that make it cumbersome to use and difficult to understand. So we have two bills that were part of our tax bill that look at overhauling that system. One moves completely to income-based. So you would have a base tax rate, which is now 2%, and if your community spent twice the yield amount, then it would be 4% of income, and that would apply to all income brackets. The proposal does have a cap in it. I think it's $25,000 for paying education taxes, because there is the belief that very high earners would be hit. You take 2 or 4% of $1 million earners, that's an awful lot of money. And there is the feeling among the drafter of the bill that that's too big a tax bill to ask for anybody to pay for education. So there's a study on that, and next year's legislature will be able to take a more complete look at that. The other proposal, which I find very interesting, is that currently we set the penny rate and the income rate, $1 on the penny rate, 2% on the income rate, raise X number of dollars per pupil. It's $9,701 on the penny rate, and it's $10,870 on the income rate. And then your community, your local spending over that, so if you spend $15,000, you pay 50% more of the base rates. That's a problem because on average across the state, communities only raise 50% of the money over the yield amount. So the funding formula has been criticized as being everybody in the state gets 50 cents on the dollar to raise their education costs, and that is a cost driver in our education system. The design of this particular proposal is to raise the yield amount to its true number, which is really $12,477, and design a tax system where where on average communities across the state pay 100% of the costs over the base amount. This would encourage communities to keep their costs down. The belief of the drafter of the bill is that will encourage communities to keep their educational costs under control, and will create a more transparent and visible system of how we raise education taxes. Neither of these were ready for prime time, but we did put in the bill that our legislative council and our fiscal analysts have to bring back to us next year a proposal that's viable and that we can then make some policy decisions on in the legislature. Thank you.
Just briefly to follow up on what Dave said, I supported the education bill, and in large part because there was going to be perhaps some action on changing the funding formula, which I think is very important that we do. Since Act 60 and the current funding formula was put into effect some time ago, back in the 90s, the cost of education in the state has gone up tremendously. And we've gone from a state where we were somewhat close to the median nationwide cost per pupil to being amongst the very highest. And I attribute the formula and how the voters can react and your understanding of these rules and regs, or lack of understanding of them, to have contributed. So I welcome the opportunity, hopefully in the not too distant future, to vote on a new funding formula that might make more sense to you all, and when you go to the polls and vote for your school budgets, that you can understand what the ramifications of it will be.
A couple weeks ago, I spoke and addressed my comments to Harvey Smith on the agricultural idea of carbon sequestering in the soil. I've recently come across something that indicated that approximately a third of the carbon dioxide, of the carbon in the atmosphere right now, has come from soils since we've started modern agricultural practices. When we go out and plow a field, we're exposing the carbon that's in the air to oxygen. It oxidizes and adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and also decreases the fertility of the soil. Harvey mentioned that he has been doing cover cropping for a long time. I think that is a wonderful idea. We were talking about the solar arrays earlier, cover cropping, and then after I spoke on that, with the idea of pasturing, someone mentioned that bees could be put on there as well, in fact are in some places. At that point, Jan Louise Ball walked in, who's a beekeeper, and she didn't hear that prior discussion, but there's another idea here that I think is really important, and that is if we did have these cover crop areas over large enough areas, we could put beehives in there, and they would have forage. We could cover crop with bee forage, and that would keep them, tend to keep them away from the large industrial projects that are using the neonicotinoids that some scientists believe are the culprit in colon collapse disorder. So the carbon sequestering is my main point here. The biochar, the cover crops, these are all going a long way. Another estimate I had is if all the agricultural land now would start sequestering carbon. We could reduce the carbon dioxide in the air over the next century by 50 to 75 parts per million, which would bring us back down to pre-industrial levels.
Paul Boven, Addison. And I want to go back to the thing with the agricultural acceptable practices, and I want to go back to the double standard we seem to have, and I think it's rather interesting. When you take a look, a house or any house site in the rural areas has to account for its sewage. Most generally, you have to put in a mound system around here, which is $40,000 to $60,000, which there are cheaper ways of doing it that the state doesn't allow, but because of its arcane ways of doing things, and they're pretty well set in their ways, they won't accept them. You take a look at the cities. The cities right now have all failed systems, mostly every one of them, yet they're able to go on major developments. Burlington's looking at several major developments, and they overflow their system how many times? And Virgins, all of these, Rutland, you name a city, they're doing it. And I think it's rather interesting that you can't sell a piece of property in the state of Vermont unless it has a working system. And yet the cities can have all these failed systems and continue to do major developments and still get away with it. To me, that's a double standard that's not fair. How do you account for that?
Okay, we're at the end of our time limit. Would a legislature like to handle that one? Just quickly.
We'll do the 1-2 here. Harvey will have. So last year when we passed the Clean Water Act, we certainly talked about the challenges. I mean, the basic tenet of last year's Clean Water Act was everybody in, and so that embraced agricultural lands, city lands, forests, you name it. Everybody was part of that. There is, you rightly point out, challenges everywhere, and what you're alluding to is we have a lot of work to do in basic infrastructure investments in municipal wastewater treatment plants. They have been underfunded for decades. A lot of the original work came with federal funds back in the 1970s. Plants are aging, populations have grown in some of those metropolitan areas, and we have substantial work ahead to make sure that wastewater treatment plants are rebuilt and made more effective. So I'm agreeing.
I just want to say we're running out of time, and this is a huge subject, and I could see that we could spend as much time on the last two topics that were brought up as we did on the energy site and discussion this morning, and I would suggest that we start off next week's discussion on this question.
Thank you all for coming today. Remember that we're on at the Legion, I believe, next time. Tim, the moderator, is already here getting ready. One other thing, too, April 16th, Saturday evening, there's a Ag Appreciation Dinner and Dance. The major leader of the Horse Traders Band is going to be there from Monument Farms. We'd like to invite you all to come. It's a free dinner.